or instructor pilot during orientation flights. During those opportunities, you'll want to practice and get down whatever your particular flow in using checklists is, so that you can brief them and use them repetitively the same way, building in your own habit pattern. And then lastly, I want to give a little preview on Modulate, so you're prepared with your homework, and Louise can give you more information there. Any questions at this point? Exciting. So we always have to talk about where checklists came from. In our case, people generally point back to a crash in 1935 with the Model 299, which was a test bed for the Boeing B-17. A control lock was not removed before takeoff. The airplane pitched up at about 60 or 70 knots and crashed. 4 people survived. I believe 2 people died. So at that point, the Air Force got pretty excited about trying to remove that particular cause for accidents. Today, we observe that checklists can be used to possibly identify critical oversights. They don't always do it, but that's what they're useful for. They also can prompt an air crew in a stressful situation, like an emergency or a situation where you want to refresh yourself on some exact numbers, and having it at hand is terrific. And something to keep in mind is that the FAA reported in one of their studies back in 2017 that the improper use of a checklist, or the use of a defective checklist, which can even be furnished by an aircraft manufacturer, is a possible contributing factor for accidents and incidents. So it's like power tools. You've got to use the right one, and you have to know how to use it. Otherwise, some bad things can happen. So let's define what we mean by SRM and CRM in English. It's single pilot resource management. I've underlined where the acronym comes from. Basically, the pilot completes everything by themselves. Whether there are people in the airplane or not, it's a single pilot activity. So if you have people that can't help you, for instance, if you're giving O-rides to cadets, you would be operating SRM, and you should be rigged and briefed, and everything you do should be with that thought in mind. In other situations, if at all possible, you want to take advantage of air crew that will be along with you. And so when you add that extra person or more to assist you, then now you really have to pay attention to the brief, so everyone knows what you're expecting from them, and they will know what to expect from you. So employing CRM is something you want to do whenever you think it's prudent, and make sure that you do the brief. So crew coordination is actually pretty similar across all kinds of airplanes. Tonight I've got a couple of video clips that I want to run. They will involve some Airbus aircraft. I also have a Boeing 777. These are clearly people that are trained and have practiced and are using exactly one integrated checklist that's been approved by their particular airlines. And so they are bringing their A game every time they fly. It's a little different in CAP because we might be using different checklists for various reasons. We may have never operated with certain air crew that we're assigned to fly with. And so we won't be quite as much of an A game, but the videos that I want to run tonight are chosen so that we have something to shoot for, a picture in our minds of excellence for how we want to run our crew coordination. And that's the reason why I chose them, and I hope I chose something that'll be interesting. So what are various crew coordination techniques? I've listed 3 here, and I've also provided some acronyms to define them. I just remembered I didn't start a recording.
That's
Let me
okay,
do
Steve.
that.
I started it.
Bless you. Okay, so let's see if I can get back to where I was. The challenge, do, verify procedure according to my reading, is arguably the most efficient, as I've listed there. It's time efficient in that it probably, for the non-airline crew doing a CDV, probably is 30% more time efficient than the other two approaches. So what does challenge, do, verify mean? The person managing the checklist will challenge the person doing the activity. That person will then do it and feed back the position or the state that they've adjusted, and that's the verify step. So they're challenged, they do the thing, and then it's verified, and then the next item is executed in the checklist. The next version is more of a typical challenge response that we hear about. Challenge response is where the item is spoken and the person doing the activity will actually do it, and that's it. So the response and verification stage are kind of the same thing. So it's a little less of a double check activity. An example would be if someone says flaps and to me, and I put the flaps in 10-degree position and then say set, versus if they say flaps 10%, I go to, or 10 degrees, I go to 10 degrees, then I look at it and verify out the window that the flaps look like they went to 10 degrees. That's a much more complete activity that proves to yourself that you've got the configuration that was called for. And the last one is do verify, and the do verify approach essentially says do everything that you think needs to be done and then use the checklist to verify. And you can see that there could be some holes in that one, especially when you think about the order of operations that some activities require. I'm thinking about takeoff pitch trim in particular when I say that. So whichever you pick, you just must make sure that you specify what the game plan is during the crew briefing. And the thing that I would like to add is, and maybe it's a thing with me, but what you'll see in the airline videos is that somebody's going to say complete when they get to the end of their checklist segment. And somehow it's, for me, in my experience, it's nice to have somebody say complete, because if I don't think it's complete, that gives me a chance to say, wait a minute, and then we agree whether it's complete or not. So before you move on, I like to have that particular step. So what does CAP say our checklist and briefing requirements are? And the reference here is going to be CAP Regulation 70-1 and CAP Standard 73-1. I think both of those should have been homework. So what does 70-1 say about briefing requirements? It says that the PIC must provide appropriate crew and passenger briefings. And then it lists the items that are required in the briefing. It's interesting, these are the same items that you'll find if you look in Part 121 operations and other parts of Part 91, they will be spelled out just like this. So CAP has incorporated essentially an FAA requirement into our controlling documents, which is as it should be. Wait a minute. And so now I want to try to play one video. You can see it's just a little over 3 minutes. This is a cargo flight. It's a Royal Maroc airline. It's a Boeing 787 out of Casablanca to New York. This airplane, the crew are briefing in English because that's what they use when they operate. It's pretty obvious to me that they're French and Arabic speakers as far as their native language. I want to call out a few details here of interest. V1 is 162 knots. VR for this particular flight is 165, and V2 is 170. So V1 is essentially refusal speed for this plane, where once you reach that, you're pretty committed to taking off because there's not enough runway left. And V2 is the speed that you need so you can actually climb, just for reference. The gross weight that she enunciated is 186 metric tons. So we're talking about a 300,000 to 400,000 pound airplane. In the report, in the briefing, she says she's got 16 metric tons of weight over her max landing weight at takeoff and considers fuel dump in case there's an emergency. And I just wanted to mention that for people where that might be a little a new way of thinking about things. Any questions before I try to get the thing to play? Okay. It's so quiet. This is really spooky. Having some problems getting my PC to cooperate here. Apologies. One more time and then we'll go on. I apologize for wasting everybody's time.
Steve, if it doesn't work, drop the link of YouTube into the chat.
Yeah, okay. And on the slide, I've got the times if people want to look at that. Thanks a lot, Peter. Okay, so back to the other slideshow. This is where I need some crew coordination and somebody to help me with this stuff. Okay, the really impressive thing about this brief was she covered all the contingencies. It was terrific the way she drilled down into detail, and I really liked the way they handled the checklist, which I think was something that would really be nice to have in the back of your mind to emulate. So checklist requirements to 70-1. The second part of paragraph 911 says that you get to pick from two different kinds of checklists as the pilot in command. One can be the NHQ approved checklists, of which everyone should have downloaded those tonight, so you know how to fetch those off of out of various points and wimmers, or you can use the manufacturer's checklist. It's totally up to the pilot in command to choose which one that he wants. However, the only admonition is the pilot must review and accomplish all checklist items on the checklist that they select. So if you choose, you can pull a checklist out of the pilot's operating handbook. In our AMOs are supposed to maintain a copy of the CAP normal procedures and emergency procedures in each aircraft. And as you know from your download, each one of these checklists is actually specific to a given tail number. That way they can accommodate not only the configuration of that particular airplane, but any STCs that are installed. Question is, are you, as someone perhaps new to flying with CAP, familiar with the layout of the normal procedures and emergency procedure checklist provided by NHQ? That's a really critical part of using any resource in the cockpit, I think, as we would all agree. And if you are going to operate under SRM, do you want to reach down, if you're using the NHQ checklist, do you want to reach down and grab this 8.5 by 11 piece of paper while you're busy trying to fly the airplane by yourself? Or do you want to print one out yourself and put it on your kneeboard, something like this, so that you have a quick reference to whatever pages you're interested in? This is a picture of what I do. I put the emergency procedures on the top leaf, so if I needed to get to the engine failure pages, I immediately close my checklist leafs there, and I'm looking at engine failure. And I know that if something's on fire, I flip to the next page, and there I will see the fire stuff, because I don't want to be playing around looking for things with those particular flavors of emergencies. So this is something you can do, since we can print down NHQ approved checklists. But as I was researching this, I learned a little bit more about the NHQ checklists. You know, it is kind of a tiny, well, it's a two-sided checklist if it's printed double-sided. It's a two-page checklist for both NP and EP checklists if it's not printed double-sided. The thing that I learned about it is that somebody has gone through and carefully researched this checklist, and they have put it together by choosing what they thought was appropriate and what would fit on the checklist page. So they were column inch limited, and it was kind of like Solomon choosing exactly which information made it to the checklist and which stuff wouldn't. So that's something that I wasn't quite aware of, but it became clear to me when I read the controlling documents a little bit more carefully. So trade-offs were made, and in the lower right-hand corner of both the emergency procedure and normal procedure checklists, there's a little disclaimer, and the disclaimer is this. And it's interesting, if you really slow down, which I hadn't, and read this carefully, it says this checklist is really just a coordinating document. It's a guide to help coordinate between the POH and NESTC data. So as a guide, they say this is just a guide. It is not all the law and the prophets, if I can use a metaphor. The pilot in command is still responsible for complying with all items in the POH and applicable STCs. So that's something to really make sure you realize, that this might not be the unabridged version of everything you want to have in your hands for an emergency or for normal procedures. So what about normal procedures, operations from memory, or if you've got a flow that you use for efficiency? Can you do that? Well, according to regulations, you can, but you need to verify it against the checklist using perhaps one of the crew coordination techniques that I briefed previously. What about mnemonics? Again, you can use them, but you need to verify it against the checklist. So for instance, for engine failure, I use the mnemonic of red, red, silver, red, which tells me to take a look at the fuel cutoff, to look at the idle cutoff, to look at the fuel switch, that's silver, the fuel pump switch, and then look over at the mags, and that's red, red, silver, red to me. But then I still have to look down at my checklist and say, did I really remember that right? And so that's the use of a mnemonic. So CAP 73-1, which is the standard in this paragraph, encourages everybody, even if they're doing SRM, to act as if you're CRM. For instance, when I'm in the cockpit, my habit from previous life is when I look at something, like if I'm calling fuel selector switch both, I'll look at it or I'll point at it. Typically, I touch things that need to be moved, and that's just a human factors thing that I picked up years ago. You don't have to do it, but I do that, and then when I'm doing a checklist with somebody else, I hope that they see that I'm pointing at the fuel selector switch so I can persuade them that I'm really looking at it when I respond, and likewise on other items. Does CAP prescribe how you run the checklist? And the answer is no. But as before, anything that you do, you should brief it if you're coordinating with somebody else and follow, plan your work and work your plan. An interesting item here is, and I think this is important because we don't always do our flying with CAP, our checklist required under Part 91 is something that I wanted to look into. And sure enough, in CFR 91503, they are required, and so that's Part 91 requirement. Not only having you're not only required to have a flashlight or equivalent, but it says clearly you have to have checklists. And further, the minimum segments in the checklist are listed here. And you can see there's 7 of them that the FAA has listed. Notice that I put in red that these checklists shall be used by the flight crew members when operating the airplane. And I'm focusing on flight crew members because I want it to be more than simply pilots. And I want to also draw the line that says when somebody's not an air crew member, they're a passenger. When they're an air crew member, I expect them to be working with me collaboratively. And when they're a passenger, not so much, but I do want the passengers to respond to me, which I'll discuss later. It's interesting, the NHQ checklist has 14 segments, checklist segments, the ones that are basically enunciated, including these 7, but 7 more, and then also all the pre-flight items. So let's take a look at one of the checklist items, and it'll be an indicator of the sort of studying I did on these checklists. And this one, the before starting engine checklist, which is in the middle of the normal procedures page, is an interesting one. It's an interesting case in point for a couple reasons. One reason is that it starts out by enunciating that the previous check, the pre-flight inspection, is complete. And you'll also see that item 2, after a number of sub-items are done, then the passenger and mission brief is also enunciated as complete. So it's one of those bookend things, which I happen to like, which says it's the mnemonic that makes you declare that that segment is done and now we can move forward as long as everybody agrees with you. Now I'd like to look at the 2 things between item 1 and item 2. Item 1, immediately after item 1 is the passenger brief, and we've got a listing of the typical, yes.
Do you want questions at the end, or do you want them during?
If they seem like something needs to be addressed, I'm open to being interrupted. Yes, okay, you have something.
I never want to discourage people from having all kinds of good things like checklists and everything else, but you quoted 91503.
Yeah.
Which is for large and turbine-powered multi-engine aircraft.
I didn't see it limited that way, but I could be.
It's subpart F, which is specific to that. I think 91103 is more what applies to us. Now, like I said, I don't want to discourage people from it, but to my knowledge, a checklist is actually not required for Part 91 flying. However, as you said, absolutely required for CAP.
Yeah. Well, thank you for correcting me on that. I'll go back and look. You know, the beauty of the internet, you find something and don't research it that extra step, perhaps. So thank you for the correction.
No problem. Yeah, and if someone figures out I'm wrong, I'd want to hear about that too.
Well, does that mean we're not going to be flying the Pilatus? I thought CAP was getting the Pilatus.
I get, well, it actually says turbine-powered multi-engine airplanes.
Oh, okay.
On 503?
Yeah. Well, it's actually subpart F of Part 91.
All right. So the King Airs. Okay.
Yeah, the King Airs. Yeah, the King Airs that we're getting for CAP will need to do that.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
That'll be fantastic. Okay. So back to the passenger brief. It's interesting. It says passenger brief, and actually, I think this is addressed to everybody in the cockpit, but when I read that, it made me think about the focus of this is to make sure that people are acquainted with everything about the airplane. There is a pertinence latitude given to the pilot in command on covering this stuff, how it's covered. But then separately from that, in our NHQ checklist, we've got the mission brief. And the question for the PIC is this going to be SRM or CRM? And when you've made that decision, then you can decide exactly how you're going to attack the mission brief. I was playing the Moroccan flight, this lady absolutely slays every item in this thing, and she did it quickly and incredibly completely. And that's really what I think we want. I'm thinking when I'm sitting in the right seat and and I'm getting the brief from the PIC on a hot day, I'd love to hear comments about refusal. You know, we'll be if we're not airborne or if we haven't hit a particular speed by a particular taxiway, then we will abort. And it's that kind of stuff where you can really take advantage of a crew member to help you eyeball, for instance, the taxiway, or if you're on a long runway, you can look at the distance remaining boards, for instance, although most of those runways are 8,000 feet long, so we'll be long gone before we ever have to do that. So getting to the end of the mission brief, the bookend is encountered again, where someone will enunciate, and according to how it was briefed, whether or not that portion is complete. And typically, someone will say, "Any questions?" And the person that's given the assignment of enunciating complete will say, "Any questions?" No, when there are no questions, they'll say complete and then move on. It's interesting when you get to past item 10 in the before starting engine checklist, they don't have an item that says complete, which sort of violates what I like to do. And I'm pretty sure they probably had to sacrifice some things like that, but I'm not sure. I simply would at the end of the before starting checklist, whoever's running the checklist, enunciating it, I'd like somebody to say complete, and then we know we can move on to the next item. Any questions or comments on that? Okay. So I had to borrow a comment that Jordan Hayes uses a lot. Controlling chaos in the cockpit is something that he's used before, and I think it's very, it really describes one of the key goals that you have, to let everyone know what their job is and let them get to it. And what pulls it all together, of course, is the brief, where you identify who's doing what and how it's going to be done. So here's a listing of some of the things that I think are important that we looked at. This is something that each pilot in command tailors to the way they like to do things, as long as they accomplish all the required checklist items. So how are we going to do it? Challenge and response? Are we going to do it CDV? Who is going to manage the checklist? Is the pilot in command going to actually read the checklist and be backed up by the MO? That's possible, especially if it's someone that's new or is being trained as an MO-T, for instance. That might be the thing that you do until you get the teamwork down and assess the capabilities of the new trainee. And agree who calls for the checklist. Is the MO going to prompt the pilot, or is that going to is that something unwelcome, and it's going to be the PIC that decides when it's time to move to that checklist segment? And you can do it either way. It just has to be agreed on so that the team can work as a well-oiled machine. I like when in a crew, instead of having to ask somebody 2 or 3 times and waste time, I like it when the crew can anticipate what's coming next. So we all get in the airplane, and everybody knows that when we get to the before starting checklist, someone that's running the checklist is going to read off seatbelts and shoulder harnesses. In fact, they may do it twice. And rather than wasting time and getting people's attention and asking them multiple times, is terrific and really professional. I think if everybody is anticipating what's coming next, and they either are ready to answer or they can offer that up as the item is coming towards them. This is going to be the case for we check on seatbelts and seat backs and on takeoff, taxi, and landing. So people should anticipate that, and it's nice to advise people of that if they're new. Also, it's kind of nice before you open windows. It's nice to ask people to tell you, just so you don't get startled or distracted. I like the notion of, if I'm going to distribute jobs, for instance, on a forced landing, I think it's lovely to be able to say to the MO and the MS, give them the assignment of managing getting the doors unlatched, because I think the pilot's going to be busy, and if he can designate that and delegate it, then it's better for the entire crew. Other things, a very important thing when you're in an emergency situation often is to maintain best glide. And the checklist, the NHQ checklist calls for 76 knots for forced landing. It's interesting, that's the right target for 3,100 pounds, so that's max gross. But if you're around 26 pounds, the POH says that 70 knots is the best glide speed. So again, this is something where you've got the NHQ checklist. It can't be a one size fits all, but it's got to be something that you're familiar with enough so that when you brief the flight, you'll say, we're taking off. Today our max gross is 2,600 on takeoff. Our best glide will be 70 knots. And that'll be different than what the checklist says, but you cover it in the brief that way. So I guess I'm not going to do this one either. Yeah, I don't think I will. This is a terrific video. I'll put the links in the chat. This is terrific because this is out of San Francisco. It's I think this is I didn't put it on here, but it's going to be an Airbus, I think 330 or 380. It is, it's a twilight departure in the evening, San Francisco, Dublin, like this says. I really thought the first 2 minutes there of the pre-taxi brief is really interesting because the way they talk about it is exactly the way we talk about this stuff in CAP, where we say, we want to know we get our taxi clearance. We want to agree what it is and write it down, and that's what they do. But before they even get their pushback, they're talking about, they're doing their own ORM by saying, okay, if they push this way, tail to the west, then we should be looking out over here because other flights are going to be coming from that direction. And I just thought it was a real nice primer in how the Big Iron does it. And it's clear that it's the same sort of thinking that we have. Of course, we're just operating on a much more tiny scale. They also cross, this is at San Francisco, the east-west runway is like oriented, 01 is the western end of the east-west runway, and they cross that dual runway, and you'll see the runway, what do they call those? The runway status lights, which I think is interesting. They're only at the big fancy airports. It's interesting to see the care they take, and they're like, they're very skeptical that they're seeing exactly what they want to see. They're sort of challenging what they're seeing and agreeing with each other that, yes, I see that guy that we expected. Yes, he looks like he's doing what the ground control told us he was going to do. And then, and only then, do they cross one of the parallels. And then they were given a hold short. they do the same kind of skeptical inspection of what's going on in the intersection runway, and then they continue on from there. So I just thought it was interesting because the way they do it is very stylized, and you can see it's very disciplined. Then they go on down and they're taking off on, I think it's 2-8. It was interesting the way they handled their agreeing on how they're going to negotiate the whole short. They're also taking a look at the incoming traffic, just the way that we like to, especially at uncontrolled airports. And the crew coordination is very hand in glove. And I actually kind of thought it was a beautiful thing to watch. And I hope that that other people might enjoy it. Then they pull onto the runway. It's interesting to me. They do the typical power up and take a look at performance at a particular setting, and then they go to 100%. And then there's backup from the non-flying pilot. By the way, it was the first officer did the takeoff, and the command pilot was basically backing them up as second pilot. And the procedure of moderating the progression as the airplane lifted off and as they ran down the runway and then did the liftoff, et cetera, I think is interesting. And it only cost you 1 minute and 20 seconds for the second module, and then it's another minute or two for the third one. Okay. So now we turn to the fun part, the emergency procedure part, when things fail. What do you need? I think in what you really need is probably the first thing you need is not the checklist that's on your knee or in the hands of the people next to you. The first thing that you need is system knowledge, like Eric and Marty briefed last week. The next thing you need is your memory items, because that's got to be your starting point to figure out, wait a minute, let's make sure that everything is at least where we thought it was. And then the last thing that you need is aeronautical decision making. So that means you try to collect the situation and then pick the best of your options once you've done that. So none of that is going to be checklist stuff. And I think that's why CAP puts CAP puts the emphasis on system knowledge, like everybody in aviation does, and then wants everyone to memorize those bold items in the NHQ checklist and otherwise identified in other manufacturers' checklists, et cetera. So here's the things that you'll need to think about when you're preparing for your orientation flights and when you're doing your Form 5. It's good to know the bold items. It's better to know and be familiar with all of them, because you don't want to run out of gas when you glance down and see the next item below the bold one and realize that, gee, I really didn't ever look at that very much. So you've got to be very familiar and at least having a pretty good memory of them. I would recommend everyone consider. The other thing is keep the big picture in mind. So what's the objective of the procedure? If there's a wing fire and you can glance over at your emergency procedures checklist, if we were to look at that and flip over to the second page of the emergency procedures, if you look at the wing fire, studying that, you realize that what you're doing is you're shutting off all the electrical sources to everything out in the wing. And I think the idea is to try to remove the source of the fire so that it doesn't ignite the gasoline. Also notice it's not all of the lights that are turned off in the pitot heat. It doesn't include the anti-collision light that's on the top of your tail, because there's no fuel out there, is the way that I'm thinking about it. And you couldn't see that if it was on fire anyway. So I like to look at these things and wonder, whoever composed this and had to make the choices of what to include and what not to include, why did they include what they did and why did they exclude what they did? And then pay careful attention to some of the other little notes that are in there, and you'll be well on your way to actually internalizing what you should do in an emergency situation, which is really what we're all about. I want to reiterate that I think mnemonics are great. I mentioned my red, silver red one, and there's tons of other ones that you can find everywhere on the internet nowadays. And they're just a nice thing to do when the pucker factor is really high and thinking is short and you just want to get through it. And as we used to say in the last century, you calmly widen your clock to get your wits about you. But nobody has clocks anymore, and you can't wind them. Another example on emergency procedures is think about what procedures are similar, what situations are similar. Again, on the second page of the emergency procedures checklist, there are like 4 or 5 different emergencies that embrace the air data computer or the air data system, the AHARS, the vacuum system. And when you look at them all, essentially all of them are saying, try to reset the breaker. And if that doesn't work out, then use the standby instrument that's designed to provide standby information for the failed item. In the case, except for the vacuum failure, which says if you've got a vacuum failure, then that is the standby instrument that's getting taken out, in this case, the standby attitude indicator, and don't look at that one anymore, even though you really want to. So in my outline, I was asked to address 3 particular emergency procedures, and these are the ones that I'll be looking at. One of them's in the NHQ emergency checklist, and the other 2 are not. So these are good examples of how everything is not included on your double-sided 8.5 by 11 checklist if you go with the NHQ checklist. Here is the entirety of what's on the NHQ emergency checklist for autopilot and electric trim failure. And I just thought I'd walk through this as an example of as how I study it and how I try to internalize it. So the first thing that I do is I read through this thing and try to figure out what in the world are we trying to do with this. So you need to think, how would I ever think that I was having this problem? I think in my mind that it's going to be a nose up or a nose down excursion that's going one way or the other, and I have no idea why that's happening. I think my natural instinct would be to grab the control wheel and counter what the nose is doing, and that's what the first item is. And it's interesting because they bother to say grasp firmly, and when I think about that, then I'm thinking, well, you know what? With a runaway trim situation, I'm probably really going to have to hold on to that, whether I'm pushing or pulling. Either way, I'm going to have to hold on to it. The next step is an interesting one, and you can skip over a very important part of this. It says simply to press and hold the autopilot trim disconnect button, the little red button on top. And what I found that I was doing when I first was reading through this is I was skipping I didn't let it penetrate into my consciousness that where it says hold in bold, and then in parentheses, they were really trying to help me to notice that and saying throughout recovery. So as I thought about this from the system perspective, I could be right, I could be wrong, but this is how I internalized it to myself. I thought, okay, so I'm holding that because it probably disconnects the electricity to the trim motor. And by holding that button, the way I'm going to remember that is I think that's what I'm doing, even if that's not the case. And then while I'm holding that button, realizing that I've stopped the motor from turning, hopefully, then I'm going to reach down and I'm going to grab the nose trim wheel, and hopefully it's not moving anymore, maybe I caught it out of the corner of my eye that it was moving, but I'm going to feel it and know that it's not moving anymore, and then I'm going to put the counter trim in so I can relieve the pressure on my hand that's grasping the control wheel firmly. So I'm making this real in my imagination and as visceral as I can. And then and only then, when you've gotten the airplane trimmed again, then you reach down and you find the autopilot circuit breaker, which is the only one that'll have the little white plastic ring on it, and you pull that out. And then, and only then, step 5, you release the autopilot trim disconnect. So I am not God's gift to aviation telling you how you should remember these things, how you should teach yourself about these things. I'm giving you my approach to these things so that you could iterate on it and do it better. And when you figure out the better way, send me an email so I can become better at this stuff too. So next item. I already noted this item is not in the emergency checklist. It's an interesting one. It's interesting because, first of all, it's not on the checklist. It's in the POH, and it might be. I am not aware. This is where I'd love to have somebody correct me. I don't know that we have any of these system level carbon monoxide level advisories installed in our airplanes, because I think that's why we've got all of our carbon monoxide detector cards Velcroed to the various instrument panels. Does anyone know otherwise on that one?
Yeah, the G1000 systems do.
All of the G1000s do?
Yeah, it's part of, if you, on the one of the system pages where they talk about the version of everything, you'll see that there's a CO detector.
Great. So this you'll find this in the POH. Again, I look at this thing, and if it's so system knowledge is it's carbon monoxide, an increase in carbon monoxide to trigger a sensor. So the only place that carbon monoxide comes from is in our airplanes, is pretty much burning fuel in the engine. The general source of carbon monoxide getting into our cabin is through the heater, and so we enter the steps of the checklist by turning off the cabin heat knob, by pushing it full in. We tried to ventilate the cockpit by pulling the cabin air out. So we're trying to flush out the carbon monoxide. We also are opening the vents that are coming in from the wing roots to get more fresh air in, and then we can even open the windows. Exciting that they put the admonition don't exceed 175 knots. I look at that as reminding you that you can open the windows all the way up to red line in the airplane. And then, of course, land as soon as practical, and that's going to be a judgment call because you have to trade off the risks of having carbon monoxide poisoning with landing in an unsuitable location. So that's a PIC call. The other note I wanted to make is on the carbon monoxide cards that we have, as long as we're talking about this, a lot of the sanitizers are getting splashed on those cards. The little white dot that's supposed to indicate whether or not CO is present darkens. The indicator as printed on the card says, if this thing it goes dark, it indicates the presence of carbon monoxide. But for the most part, what those are indicating is the presence of sanitizer previously applied. So that's something to be mindful of. And another pilot in the maintenance chain mentioned to me that the cards are supposed to, when they are ventilated, they should go back to light color again. And if something stays brown in the fresh air when you ventilate it a lot, then that's good evidence that the card has been contaminated with sanitizer rather than being indicating the presence of CO. So this is the write-up that's in the POH. So much nicer to have a short list of things. You don't want to be even in carbon monoxide poisoning, I wouldn't want to be sitting there fishing out the POH and then reading it. Meanwhile, I'm being exposed to carbon monoxide and becoming cyanotic, et cetera, et cetera. So this is where system knowledge is your best friend, so that you can beat the clock on getting into a jam. Then the last item that I was asked to brief is low oil pressure. Again, it's not on the emergency checklist. This is in the POH. It's a much more concise write-up than what is in there for carbon monoxide. When I read this over, it seems to me like a pretty much of a 98% system knowledge situation, and so studying the illuminated procedures, both the emergency and normal procedures, is something that's really worthwhile, so that you can be on top of things without trying to get the POH out of that little pocket in the back right seat. Questions or comments on those procedures? And corrections, please. Okay. Checklist with crew coordination. This is sort of a summary of what we've talked about. The addition to this is that when you do your Form 5, you should plan on whether it's your orientation flights, your back in the saddle flights, or if it's your check ride, you get to use the instructor pilot or check pilot in the right seat as a competent crewman. So I recommend that you brief the flight as a CRM situation and take advantage of that opportunity. Although I suppose you can do it at your will as a single pilot resource. The only other thing I haven't mentioned is that I think the hardest part of flying in our organization is that all crew members and pilots are at varying degrees of proficiency and currency, and we need to back each other up and work as a collaborative team to make sure that we can deliver the best performance that we can. And that's what makes, I think, our operations very challenging, and actually makes them possibly a little harder than something like the airline situation, where people are bringing their A game every day because they're flying a lot and they've got procedures that they just hone to a very sharp edge. Any questions or comments on the checklists, emergency or normal procedures? Okay, so I just have a few slides here I'm going to do for Louise for her briefing that comes up next week.
Yeah, so take notes.
Take notes, yeah. This lady is tough, so you better bring your A game for her. Louise, do you want to brief this? It's your stuff.
Sure, I don't mind. So we're going to be doing
the assignment the way you want to do it, and I can do the other slides, or you can take over 100%, and I'll just flip the slides for you.
Okay, well, we can play that one by ear. Crew coordination here, right?
You bet.
So I'm told we're going to go over sections 5 and 6 of the POH, but I think a lot of this will be review. But I'd like to let's play with the flight plan. Use whatever tool, pen and paper, pencil and paper, whatever flight planning tool you like to use, blank paper or one of those forms that we used to fill out when we were all training 30 years ago. In any case, use whatever tool you want to use. Oops, go back. You scrolled forward. Can you go back?
Oh, it moved?
Yeah, it moved.
Oh, shoot, I'm still, oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry.
Come on. You're doing too well. Oh, come on, I'm stuck.
Everyone took notes already, right? So I don't have to go.
Oh, okay, I've regained control.
There you go. You've regained control. Okay, so we're going to create a VFR flight plan from Reed Hillview to Truckee. Use March 21st. That's this Sunday. So use the actual weather or forecast weather for March 21st. The aircraft will be CAP 445, and you've got an MP with flying weight of 180 pounds. We're going to talk about flying weight. MO with a flying weight of 210 pounds and a mission scanner with a flying weight of 205 pounds. Your fuel load is 50 gallons. What's your planned route and why? What's the fuel you required? What's your reserve? What's required and how much reserve do you actually have? What's the performance? Are you going to do it, 75% or what's the performance you're going to choose? And then, based on the weather and other things, do you have enough fuel, all of that? Give us a go, no go. And if I didn't cover something here, just make some assumptions and tell us what your assumptions were. Okay? It's pretty straightforward, right? You pull up ForeFlight, which we all have for free now, and it does it for you, sort of. You got to check it. You got to make sure it's doing what you want it to do. And you have to have it set up with your aircraft. So what do you have on the next slide?
I walked through a number of the people don't have ForeFlight. Oh, come on.
Oh, that's true. You have to be a pilot first before you get ForeFlight.
That's 22.
Okay, so if you don't have it, then use whichever flight planning tool you like to use. ForeFlight's not required. If it is, you need to know how to use it. If you do use it, you need to show how that you know how to use it. But whatever tool you use is fine. Did you skip one? Oh, is this it? Or is this the next page?
That's the next one.
Okay. So am I doing this? We're going through the missions and sorties.
Do you want me to just walk through? Because I know what's coming and you don't. It's not fair.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So this simply points everybody to the 70-12 onboarding document. This should give you reminders on how to navigate through WIMRs. It's a really good document, and I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that. So that's what that was. Boy, I'm hanging up a lot here.
Actually, your IC and your FRO sometimes will do sorties for you if you're in the middle of a mission. They have access to a computer and you don't. So, but generally, yeah, you need to be prepared.
Louise, it's Peter. I just wanted to add on there.
Yeah.
It's really the more the pilot can go through and do all the work as indicated in that slide right there. Okay, it's very, very important to get that ORM, the weight and balance, the total. We went over this in a previous presentation earlier in the pilot course. Once the team here become mission pilots and they're actually designated, as you well know, on missions, then that's a kind of a different process using the AOBD and the flight release officer to launch sorties in that regard.
True.
But for this particular course that Steve and you are going over right now, the onus is on you as the individual pilot or pilot trainee to fulfill this slide that is being shown right now. If you have any questions, reach out to Keith or George or another pilot mentor, and they can help you out with it.
And existing sorties on flights that have been closed, you can look at that data. It's not, I mean, you can't change it. Please don't change it. But you can look at it and get ideas for what other people put in there. Some are better than others. I think was it the Air Force? Somebody did an audit of sortie files in CAP across, I think it was across wings, and had some stellar examples of what not to do and also of what to do. So it was kind of interesting. Don't become an example of what not to do.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. One of the rules of thumb for WIMMers, which you've probably heard before, but it bears repeating, is never leave a blank space. If nothing else, put an NA in there.
Huh. I'm struggling to get this thing to advance. I don't know. I'm working on it here. I think everybody should be aware of this one. I don't know if it's been covered before. This is a mobile app that should be on your phone. You can also access it through, I'm accessing it also through my Windows computer. I suppose it may work on Mac, but I don't know. This will be all the real data for if you don't have for-flight access to the CAP data, then you can get aircraft info that's up in the upper left-hand corner. All these widgets will be enormously useful information for you.
Yeah, and this is where you get your Form 14 for your fuel receipt and the FRO list, although that's the complete list, and some sorties of some missions have restricted FRO lists, so be aware of that. The toll tool is the takeoff and landing distance tool is here that you can use. It's not, you don't have to use that tool, but you do need to use you do need to upload some indication that you've done that calculation. So
yeah. So here's the listing of all the stuff on the previous little buttons.
Yeah. And I don't believe the member info crew weight, so you have to ask them, because people put in, their weight that, when they got on the scale in the morning, when they got out of bed, and that's not their flying weight. That's what I was talking about, flying weight. They got to give you a weight of them and all their stuff and their bottle of water and whatever else they're bringing with them. So. I don't know if anyone's had trouble since last Saturday. I have had hit or miss luck with the Form 14 tool. It sometimes goes through. It says it's submitting, and then I never get the email with the PDF. So I don't know how many I've submitted and not got the PDF. Out of 4 sorties, I finally got 3 to go through. I still have 1 that's outstanding, and then I had 2 sorties today, and neither of them went through. So. Maybe it's my Mac or my iPhone or my iPad. They're all not working. I gotta whip out the Windows computer, maybe it'll work there.
Do you want to talk about this one? This is just the items that we generally.
Okay. Sure. When you're doing your pre-flight planning and making that go no go decision, make sure you consider the PAVE checks. I'm safe. That's actually part of the FRO checklist. So make sure, you are checking those items, and I'm safe. That what all the words that those letters stand for, and as for your crew or whoever else you're flying with. And you might have personal minimums or personal limits that exceed, the requirements for CAP. For instance, for me, alcohol, I just have a personal rule that I don't drink 24 hours in advance of the flight. Yeah, it's more than what's required, but that's just my personal limit. So you might have your own personal limits for some of these items, which is okay. Okay,
that was the end of the slides that I was hoping to serve you with. Does that do it okay?
Yeah, thank you. Can I show a really cool picture?
Sure. Can I do one more slide and then turn it over to you?
Okay.
Yeah, so the answers well, I'll let everybody figure 6 out for themselves, but the answers to the first 5 all should be false for various tricky reasons and some very obvious reasons, I think. But if you can go through this and go, oh yeah, they're all false, then I succeeded and I get a gold star. If not, send me an email and let's talk about it to see if I either wrote the question poorly or there's something we ought to chat about. I think that's it for me. Do you want to take over sharing now?